see some leisurely reading. How we doing? Yeah, I walked in a few minutes ahead of you.
All right, ready? We're ready?
Good morning. I'd like to call this meeting of the Delta Stewardship Council on Thursday, January 25th to order and begin with the roll call.
Tatayan here.
Fiorini here. We have a quorum. The next item on the agenda is to recess to closed executive session. For those that are following on the webcast, I estimate this will take about 50 minutes. So tune in a little bit before 10 o'clock. We should be resuming an open session then. So we're now in closed executive session.
It's hard because it's convenient, but it's all the different.
Let's take us to one.
And it knocks over. And that's the other. It's so we're ready to go. It's easy, but.
Once again, good morning. We are reconvening in open session. I have nothing to report coming out of closed executive session. Next item, file item number 5, adoption of the December 14th, 2017 meeting summary. What is your pleasure? Tatayan moves. Gatto seconds. Any discussion on the motion? We'll vote. Fiorini, aye. Motion passes unanimously. File item number 6, the chair's report. Jessica Pearson, 2 months ago, indicated that we were successful in receiving an executive fellow to be appointed to our agency. I wanted to review for you just briefly what the executive fellowship experience is. It's a program that provides experiential education that uniquely integrates high-level government work experience with academic and professional development. Executive fellows are placed with a mentor in one of the many executive offices of California's executive branch, which include the Office of the Governor, constitutional offices, cabinet-level agencies, and departments. Executive fellows function as full-time professional staff in these offices while meeting weekly for graduate seminars in public policy and administration. Recent college graduates and mid-career professionals of all academic disciplines, backgrounds, and levels of experience who are interested in beginning a career in public service and policy are encouraged to apply. We're very fortunate to have Seth Young, who is our executive fellow. Seth's hometown is Stockton, California. He graduated from Chapman University with a Bachelor of Science degree in Biological Sciences. His attraction to the Stewardship Council was out of a curiosity about how science informs policy and decision-making. And I think he has affirmed that this is the right place to be. Seth has been working on a number of projects for us, including an evaluation of an ability to pay methodology. He has recently developed an appetite for helping carry out one of the recommendations in the Delta Plan that has to do with promoting wildlife-friendly farming, and much of his time is going to be dedicated to that. So just wanted to point out Seth is in the audience, and hope you all get a chance to interact with him, and he's been a real bonus to have on staff. Seth, welcome. That concludes file item number 6, and we'll move on now to the Executive Officer's Report, file item number 7.
Thank you, Chair Fiorini. Good morning, council members. So I wanted to start out the Executive Officer's Report on behalf of Jessica Pearson, talking about council actions to implement the Delta Plan. So I just wanted to cover comment letters that council staff has sent in the past month since we met last, and talk a little bit about some covered actions. So this month, let's see, as overall, the council staff sends these letters as a responsible agency under CEQA to make agencies aware of the Delta Plan provisions and our responsibilities, especially if their project is a potential covered action. This month, we sent letters in response to environmental documents on 2 storage projects, the proposed Sites Reservoir in Sacramento Valley and the proposed expansion of Los Vaqueros Reservoir in Contra Costa County. Sites Reservoir is proposed as an off-stream reservoir near the town of Maxwell. We offered information on the relevance of the project as a covered action, listed relevant Delta Plan policies, and our recommendations on where and how they can be addressed in the project's draft EIR. And we made them aware of our standing offer to continue discussions through early consultation. Los Vaqueros is an existing reservoir near Brentwood for water pumped from the Delta by Contra Costa Water District. We acknowledge that the district considers this proposed expansion a covered action and discussed relevant Delta Plan policies that should be included in the project's draft supplemental final EIR, EIS, and offered early consultation.
Jessica, just a minute. Can everybody hear okay? Move the microphone real close to you.
There we go. Is that better? All right. Okay, covered action filing. Since we last met, 2 covered actions have filed certifications of consistency and are in the public review period. And one was in the public review period last month and has passed without appeal. On January 2nd, a private group working with the California Department of Water Resources certified a restoration project at Yolo Flyaway Farms in the Yolo Bypass. Yolo Flyaway Farms project proposes to restore approximately 381 acres of mostly intertidal and subtidal marsh, as well as improve drainage to protect water quality and minimize introduction of agricultural contaminants. On January 10th, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife certified the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area Habitat and Drainage Improvement Project. The Habitat and Drainage Improvement Project is located along the northernmost boundary of the legal delta and includes 5 major components to enhance Fish and Wildlife's ability to manage wetland resources and agricultural operations within the Yolo Basin Wildlife Area. So, and lastly, certification for the Rio Vista Estuarine Research Station, or RIVERS. We discussed this at our meeting in December. It has now cleared the 30-day public review period. The station would be construction on the site of the decommissioned City of Rio Vista Army Base and aims to bring ongoing research and monitoring activities for the San Francisco Bay and Delta to a single riverfront location. You'll hear more about the programs that would benefit from this project when Steve Culverson talks about the IEP program later today. So Randy talked a little bit about our fellows. I wanted to talk about another program that the council supports that really helps up-and-coming leaders. Back in October, Jessica Pearson told you that the Water Education Foundation and their Water Leaders program just celebrated their 20th anniversary. This one-year program takes up-and-coming community leaders from diverse backgrounds and educates them about water issues statewide. Jessica Pearson was in the Water Leaders program, class of 2007. Chair Randy Fiorini was her mentor. One of our science program managers, Lindsay Correa, was in the class of 2014. Another one of our staff members in the planning division, Megan Brooks, just graduated from the program this past year. And I am proud to announce that Kate Anderson in our planning division has been accepted into the class of 2018. I have worked with Kate since she got here. She has really helped a lot on the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee and is working steadily in the planning division right now on a variety of projects, and we're very happy to have her in the program. So congratulations to Kate and to Megan, who just graduated, and we look forward to presentations on their projects. The council also supports Sea Grant Fellows. We support 2 aspects of this program. One, research grants, and you'll hear about that throughout the year. But we also support fellows that are in our office and really embedded with our staff. So new Sea Grant Fellows will be joining us soon, and Dr. John Calloway will facilitate introductions as a part of his report. But I wanted to acknowledge the 3 outstanding fellows who have been with us this year. So this year's class of Sea Grant Fellows was Tricia Lee, Catherine Cordier, and Heidi Williams. Catherine is here. You know her from the By the Numbers report. Heidi really helped out on science communications, and if you are on Twitter and follow us, you'll see tweets from her on Friday, her Science Friday tweets. And then Tricia was really instrumental in helping the Delta Independent Science Board. So we wanted to thank them for all of their hard work. We hope it was a great experience for them. They're moving on to new jobs. Some of them have jobs with the state, which is excellent. We're glad we can continue to work with them. And also there was one other fellow, Eva Bush, who started with the program, and we hired her as a staff member this year. So one other personnel announcement. Jessica O'Connor, some of you might remember her. She has returned to the council as the supervisor for Contracts Purchasing and Business Services office within the Division of Administration. She was our prior contract and purchasing analyst under CalFed and the council, so she worked here for about 10 years. She missed us and she came back. So she's back to continue this type of work. She has a tremendous amount of management experience. She was previously at the Conservancy. When she was here at the council, she really helped form the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee. She helped with setting up the Administrative Performance Measures Tracking Program, and we are just thrilled to have her on board. So we have now reached our quota of 3 Jessicas. We like to maintain that. Yep. All right. So with that, Bethany, is there a legal update?
There is. I'd like to invite Andrew Tariainen up to give the council an update on two cases that, or 2 or 3 that deserve mention this month.
How about this? Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the council. First, to go back to a portion of the executive officer's report, I was also a water leader in 2005. It's a great program, and I'm glad to see that the council has staff that are participating. I really encourage that. I just have I have a very brief legal update. We've been in past months, we've skipped a couple months now, but in past months we've updated you on some litigation relating to the water fix project, and I just wanted to kind of bring us up to date on where those cases are. The 18 EIR lawsuits have all been coordinated to Sacramento County, but they are still awaiting assignment to a trial judge. So if that happens soon, then there'll likely be a briefing and maybe the merits briefing later this year. The DWR's water fix validation action is still in the preliminary motion stage, with parties arguing about dismissal motions and other kinds of procedural motions. That'll probably reach merits later this year as well. There's 2 federal lawsuits challenging the biological opinions. They were initially filed in the Northern District. They were moved to the Eastern District, and those parties have set a schedule to brief their summary judgment motions for later this year, and the court will likely rule. They're 2 separate cases, so they're on 2 separate tracks. The court will probably rule later this year and maybe early next year on the 2 of them. Then the third, or the separate matter, the new matter, just because it's been in the news and it has some relevance to us, the city of Oroville last week filed a lawsuit in Butte County Superior Court regarding the Oroville Dam spillway incident of last February. And they allege a number of tort causes of action: dangerous condition of public property, public nuisance, private nuisance, negligence, all causing harm and damages to the city. But the city hasn't specified their damages or the harm that they suffered. We think this is the first probably of several lawsuits that are likely to spring from that case. So we'll continue to monitor those and report back as necessary. And that concludes. If there are any questions.
Any questions of Andrew? Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to call Brian Stambra for the legislative report.
Thanks, Jessica. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members. January 3rd marked the beginning of the second year of the legislative session, and while a vast majority of council-related bills were dispensed with last fall, a few bills remain unresolved as we move into the new year. This includes a bill familiar to the council, AB 732, by Assemblymember Jim Frazier, which proposes to extend the cost share for the Delta Levy Subventions Program an additional 2 years. That would take it out to July of 2020. While the bill currently sits in Senate Appropriations and could technically still move forward this year, the author's office does not plan to continue pursuing the issue at this time. Turning to water conservation and the suite of bills that stalled out last year, as the council is aware, additional conversations and discussions surrounding these bills occurred during the interim and are expected to continue in the coming months. As a result, I would anticipate providing additional updates on these activities as the year moves forward. One additional piece of legislation that I want to draw your attention to is AB 1876 by Assemblymember Jim Frazier. This was just introduced last week, and this bill would increase the number of voting members on this body to 11, as well as add an ex officio member of the legislature from each house, which would bring the total membership total to 13. As proposed, the additional council members would be appointed by representatives from the Delta counties. This concept was previously introduced by Mr. Frazier in a vehicle from last year, but ultimately was not heard in a policy committee, with a number of water agencies registering their opposition at the time. AB 1876 will be heard in Assembly Natural Resources in the coming weeks. And then one final point that I'd like to note, just in terms of the legislative calendar: February 16th is the bill introduction deadline, so I'd anticipate having a better sense of the legislative outlook for the year at next month's meeting. And then moving on to the introduction of the governor's budget on January 10th. In addition to fully funding the rainy day reserve in anticipation of future lean years and an increase in funding for education, the $190 billion budget includes the council's proposed budget augmentation for the upcoming fiscal year. To summarize, there are really three main components to the proposal. The first is a one-time $2 million augmentation for critical science funding that would come from the Environmental License Plate Fund. The second is permanent funding for 3 senior environmental scientist positions with an emphasis on adaptive management expertise. And the third is a request for additional legal assistance. Overall, this request would increase the council's budget for fiscal year 18-19 to a little over $28.5 million and nearly 60 budgeted positions. In the coming months, council staff will continue meeting with budget committee staff in anticipation of hearings in early spring. And with that, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report.
Any questions of Ryan? Ryan, on AB 732, the Frazier bill, we talked about this with one of Assemblymember Frazier's staff in the audience, and at the, I think, probably provided public comment, although I don't remember for sure. But at any rate, in September, October, we had a conversation. We offered to meet with them. Has anything come of that offer?
At last conversation, Mr. Chair, I believe staff was still looking into the possibility of meeting with us, but nothing has been finalized at this time.
Okay, all right, thanks. Okay, thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Council members, in your binder is our quarterly contract update. I didn't have any specific topics about this, but if there were any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. It's agenda item 7C.
Any questions? I see none.
Nope. Okay. Also in your binder is an ecosystem amendment update. If you remember last month, we asked staff to put together a memorandum just providing an update on the progress on that amendment. So I just wanted to, again, there's a new memo this month, and next month we will have staff come to do a presentation, and we'll have a much more detailed discussion. But I just wanted to provide a few highlights. So last month we provided, since last month, we've really begun our thorough review of what is currently in the ecosystem chapter. We're looking at the plan narrative, we're looking at recommendations, policies, and really assessing the need for a refinement of those policies, the regulations and recommendations, given the synthesis of best available science that's currently underway. At the last council meeting, Chair Fiorini confirmed members of the council subcommittee, so the chair, the vice chair, and member Weinberg, which will meet on a monthly basis to provide feedback to staff on the development of the amendment. The first subcommittee was held on January 17th. And staff is currently preparing a proposed ecosystem amendment for council consideration. We're really going to be working on this throughout the year. This will include refined performance measures, policies, recommendations. We are continuing to do outreach, and we'll continue this through the spring with a likely public meeting in February, so stay tuned for a date on that. We're continuing listening sessions. We had a recent meeting with the Interagency Committee, which includes state and federal agencies that work in the Delta on restoration. And quite soon you will see synthesis papers that are coming out. So on climate change, natural communities, including aquatic and terrestrial, and then restoration overall. So we look forward to continuing to bring this to you and have more discussion.
Skip. Let me go to Susan first as the chair of the subcommittee. And then
I don't have a question, Jessica, but I just wanted to say that at our first subcommittee meeting on the ecosystem amendment, it was evident to me that staff is working very diligently and methodically. They're taking input from these listening sessions very seriously, and I am heartened at what's already been produced so quickly, and I know the schedule is ambitious, but from what I've seen so far, I think it's doable.
Skip.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to take this opportunity. Last week at our Delta Protection Commission meeting, Terry Gaines and Ron Melser, Ron made the presentation on the Chapter 4 amendments, did a great job. There were some questions that he very quickly answered, and I think the Protection Commission feels, as to use your word, heartened that things are moving along and that this amendment is going to address some of the concerns that we've had. So I wanted to acknowledge Ron for a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Skip. Good job, Ron. Anything else on this matter?
No,
Okay,
nothing
that's
else.
a good update.
Okay. All right, thanks so much. All right, so moving on, staff is requesting an approval of a contract amendment with Gloston. The contract amendment would provide additional funding of $25,000 for a study that's supporting efforts to eliminate ballast water introductions of invasive species and extend the length of the contract by 6 months. The study is being conducted at the request of the California State Lands Commission, which is reimbursing the council for all of its costs. The amendment is required to follow through on expert panel recommendations to develop a policy-relevant summary that is outside the existing scope of work of the contract. So this is an action item.
This is an action item. You've heard the staff recommendation. What's your pleasure?
I'll move the item.
Gatto moves. Weinberg seconds. Any discussion? And I know I'm going to take public comment. Okay, I want to give the council first opportunity. Is there any public comment on this matter? Okay, then we are ready for a vote.
Tatali and I.
Fiorini, aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Bethany, I saw you out of the corner of my eye.
All right, so with a new year, we have some opportunities to look back at what happened in 2017 and look forward to what our priorities are for next year. So the rest of the meeting agenda will feature presentations on a look back and a look forward, and we can talk a bit about our draft annual report. Other items today, we have a presentation by Steve Culverson on the Interagency Ecological Program, and of course the lead scientist report and by the numbers. So if there aren't any other questions, that concludes the executive officer's report.
No? Okay.
Good.
Concludes
Okay.
file item number 7. Any public comment on anything in that matter? Thank you. On to file item number 8, lead scientist report, Dr. John Callaway.
Thank you, Chair Fiorini, and welcome, council members. Happy New Year. I have a few items to present to you. Actually, before I get into the items that are in the binder, as Jessica mentioned, our Sea Grant Fellows, we're at the transition, but we're losing the existing Sea Grant Fellows that we have. We have 4 new Sea Grant Fellows coming, and I just wanted to very briefly introduce. They aren't here, but I wanted to highlight the fellows that we will be joining both the Planning Division as well as the Science Program. So we have one new fellow, Stephen Pang, in the Planning and Performance Division. He has a MS in Marine Sciences from Moss Landing Marine Lab. His thesis focused on reproductive outputs of gobies, which I learned just last night have the ability to change their sex depending on the numbers of other individuals that are present. And so he looked at reproductive issues for this two very unusual species that are here on the California coast. He is going to be helping on the ecosystem amendment with the Planning Division, and he also will be working on other issues in Planning and Performance Division. In the Science Program, we have 3 new fellows. The first, Mateo Robbins, will be working on the Science Plan and in the Science Infrastructure Group. He's completing his PhD right now at UC Davis. For his dissertation, he looked at social network analysis to evaluate coastal resource use and considering stakeholders and how to incorporate stakeholders into those resource decisions. For our program, he will be working on the science plan and the update of the science plan, as well as applying his understanding of this social network analysis, looking at group formations and social networks to incorporate more consideration of human aspects, human dimensions into science. The second fellow in the science program is Amanda Wasserman. She'll be focusing on science communication. She received her Master's of Science at CSU Monterey Bay, looking at landscape ecology of nearshore fish communities using video, underwater video, and other new technologies. And since she graduated, she has been working most recently on a fisheries management plan for Pacific herring in California. Here at the science program, she will be working on all things related to science communication, including the lead scientist report, so you'll see her a lot. And also working with our production for conferences, symposia, brown bag seminars. And the last Sea Grant Fellow that will be joining us is Katerina Pien. She'll be working with the Adaptive Management Group. She has a master's also from Moss Landing Marine Laboratory. She worked on spatial and temporal distribution of sharks and rays in Elkhorn Slough right there at Moss Landing, and how habitat changes have affected shark and ray abundances and distributions there. At the science program, she will be working with the Independent Science Board and other adaptive management issues. So we have a great new class to really help the science program move forward. So now I want to talk about 2 papers that I included in the summary. The first is Designing River Flows to Improve Food Security Futures in the Lower Mekong Basin. And this is by John Sabo from Arizona State University. It just came out in December in Science Magazine. It was actually featured on the cover of Science Magazine, and Science is definitely the highest profile science magazine in the country, so clearly lots of interest. It actually came out the exact week that the Lobo panel was discussing many of these same issues, and I noticed it then, and I thought it would be of interest for you. It really has lots of parallels to the considerations that we're making here in the Delta and the Central Valley, considering how do we manage water for multiple uses. So the focus in the Mekong, just similar to here, is looking at dams and hydroelectric power impacts on fisheries. Just to give some context, the Mekong is really truly one of the world's great rivers, the 12th longest river in the world. It starts way up in the Tibetan Plateau. flows all the way down into through Southeast Asia, through Cambodia and Vietnam, Thailand, Laos. The annual flow is 25 times that of the Sacramento River, so it's an enormous river. It supports 60 million people with hydroelectric power and also enormous fisheries all throughout the river. The focus of this was really on the lower part of the basin, trying to understand what the characteristics of flows are that support fisheries in the Tonle Sap Lake or basin that is at the low end of the river in Cambodia and has a large freshwater fisheries there. So they looked at 100 years of flows on the river, and similar to the work that's been done here looking at environmental flows, trying to characterize what are the specifics of the flows that are correlated with higher fish production. So analogous to the work that you've heard about with environmental flows that Sarah Yarnell or Eric Stein presented to the science program just in the last few months or 6 months ago. And so they used a really sophisticated numerical analysis to characterize all the different aspects of the flow, the pulse of the height of the pulse flows, how long they last, all those characteristics. What they found that was expected is that higher flows during those pulses are correlated with higher fish production, which is true on almost every river. But what they also found was that in the years where there were lower base flows before the pulse and a bigger variation between the low flow and the high flow, they had higher fish production. So they make the case that you could design the flow and control the flow on the river to support higher fish production. I think so there's lots of analogies to what we could learn here. I think really the take-home message for us is we're not the only ones thinking about these things. There's all these additional tools out there that we could think about, analogous to what we've done, but I think it's worthwhile for people to look and see how they've evaluated flows more specifically. And I think in some cases their system is simpler than ours. They don't have the cold water issue. Cold water flows, it's a tropical warm water river by the time it's down in Cambodia, so that the temperature issues aren't as significant. And they were looking at one fishery. They weren't looking at issues of species diversity or other things. So they were really looking at those different uses, but in a somewhat narrow sense. But I think there's lots to learn and interesting comparisons with our system. Questions?
The low base flow period followed by the heavy pulse, what condition was being created through that by having that low flow?
They really were only looking at sort of the hydrological characteristics. So they actually don't even identify any specific biological specifics, but my guess is maybe, I don't know.
They just noticed that there was a
So
correlation.
they're somewhat, I think, we're lucky in that we actually have a lot more data and a lot more ancillary data, not just flows. In this case, mostly they were really relying on flows and looking at those relationships.
Did that match sort of a historical pattern,
unimpeded
flow type of condition?
Yeah, so just like our rivers systems, they're raising base flows and lowering peak flows with the dams and having negative effects on the fisheries.
So this is kind of supportive of that return to kind of a natural flow regime.
What they make the case is that they're not advocating a return back to completely natural flows, and that there's certainly lots of benefits of flood protection and hydrological or hydroelectric production, but the flows could be managed in a way to promote multiple benefits.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so the second paper is closer to home, and the second paper is, the title is Changes in Water Consumption Linked to Heavy News Media Coverage of Extreme Climatic Events, and this is by Kimberly Quesnell and Nusha Ajami at Stanford University. And so this paper I chose because it really is another paper looking at those social science connections and the importance of outreach and awareness to address environmental issues. So what these two authors did was they looked at news coverage of our two recent droughts in 2007, 2009, 2011, 2016. What they documented was that there was much greater news coverage in the second drought, the first drought coinciding with the economic downturn and the presidential election in 2008 didn't get nearly as much local coverage. And so they wanted to see, with additional news coverage, did that have an effect on water use? They looked at water use in a number of districts or regions throughout the San Francisco Bay Area. And so first what they found was there was a big difference in news coverage. There was also they felt there was a difference in public awareness as well. If you use internet searches as an index of public awareness, there were a significant increase in searches around drought in the second drought compared to the first drought, and that was very highly correlated with media coverage. So I think one thing to be aware of, this is all, similar with the previous report, this is all correlation. And one thing any statistician will tell you, and I think I've said before, is correlation is not causation. There's not necessarily a direct effect, but there is some link there that we want to try to understand that link. So clearly there was an increase in media coverage, and they documented that there was a decrease in water use in the second drought. They carefully pointed out that it wasn't related to the mandated reductions in 2015. These reductions came prior to 2015, actually were more like 2013, 2014. And so they found that for every 100 drought-related articles per month, there was an 18% reduction in water use. Again, not to say publish more articles and you're going to make people use less water, but it's just, I think, important message that to us as well is getting our message out there to the public is really critical, and we want to really raise public awareness, and hopefully that will have some impact that we want to see. So I think that's really the take-home message there is that they found this relationship. They point out that they actually also interestingly looked at residential use versus commercial irrigation use in the same region, and they found no reduction in commercial irrigation use, probably because they wanted to they had to keep their the irrigation levels up to keep their landscaping in place. And in 2015 there was a reduction when it was mandated, but the news affected home use but not commercial use. So any questions on that article?
Just a comment. There's nothing better than press to bring attention to something, but some other factor that needs to be considered is while consumption was going down, rates were being raised by water agencies to make up the budget deficit.
Yes.
So I think looking at the dollars might be more to the point than the news media.
Yeah, so actually, for the sake of brevity, I didn't discuss, but they actually did look at that. So they didn't look at news media coverage alone. They looked at use compared to temperature, to precipitation, to water price. So they looked at about 6 or 8 variables that are likely to predict. And many of them did have an effect, but media coverage, even considering that, still caused use to go down. So yeah, that's definitely true.
As someone who was involved in managing through 3 droughts over 25 years, absolutely there's a correlation, and Skip, you're right, because we went through this, especially the 2007, I would say to 2010 drought. Rates were going up, the economy was bad, so where I think it's difficult for the social sciences to be really accurate is attributing a specific percentage to reduction, because we go, whoa, how much is attributable to the economy, how much is attributable to the rates going up, but the messaging, the public information, I mean, it has never failed, in at least the 3 droughts I was involved in, is once the public gets the message that it's serious, they take steps. And we saw it in the 2007 drought. it dropped. We weren't sure why it dropped. In this drought, it was very clear the severity, the mandatory nature of things, all of that was critical to dropping water use. And we didn't have all the other background noise, but you know, it's a tough thing to do. Definite correlation. I'll go there, but 18%, you know, it's like, hey, at least they're trying. So I commend them for trying to do that. And this is stuff that's really important to understand. So thank you for putting that.
Good. I think it's just also highlights the need and the value for that social science kind of work. I'll also highlight that the author Nusha Ajami has, I just asked her to join our science advisory committee, our local science advisory committee, and she's accepted and is joining that. I'll tell you more about the science advisory committee in the next month or two. But that's really part of our push to get more incorporation of social science into the issues here in the Delta. Okay, so any other questions on those articles? Okay, so a few other issues that I wanted to highlight. First and foremost is the update and review of the Delta Science Plan. So in addition to the Delta Plan being 5 years old, the Delta Science Plan is at its 5-year anniversary, and we are mandated to evaluate, to review that, and to update it this year. And so that really will be one of the highest priorities for the science program moving forward this year. And as you know, the science plan is really the framework for doing collaborative science within the Delta. So it's not the Delta Science Programs plan, it's the science plan for the Delta. And it really set up the idea of one Delta, one science. And so a big part of the update this year will be really evaluating how we can facilitate better collaboration, better cooperation amongst the many different efforts to improve our understanding and incorporate science in the Delta. Importantly, it's a very open, the update of the plan will be a very open and collaborative process itself. And so just as with the ecosystem amendment, we're doing a lot of outreach to get input on what other organizations, other state and federal agencies, stakeholders really feel are critical issues and critical processes that need to be incorporated into that science, into the science plan. And Yumi Henneberry, who is here, is leading and facilitating that effort within the science program. The science staff are just now developing our ideas about what we feel are critical changes that need to happen to update the plan. And over the next few months, we'll be doing that outreach and input. In March or April, we'll have a public workshop to get very detailed input from anyone interested in how we might want to update the plan. And we also will be getting input from our local science advisory committee and the independent science board. And we'll be bringing that plan to you probably around the end of the year, but we will keep you updated on how it's developing. And if you have any thoughts or input on how we might, what any critical issues are that we need to really think about, we welcome your input. Two other things that I'll very briefly.
Dr. Callaway, I think it's interesting that, and I don't know what prompted this comment, in the body of the letter you talk about one important goal being open and transparent in the process. Why was that statement included? Did you feel we weren't open and transparent? Or?
No, I feel like the science plan itself, as it initially was developed, it was a very open and transparent process, and I think we want to be as inclusive as possible. As I said, it's not the science plan for the program, it's the science plan for the Delta, and so we really just want to make people aware of that we welcome their input and that it's developed collaboratively.
And the reason I bring that up is, as a member of the Delta Counties Coalition, this has been an issue for us that the process for the water fix, in our opinion, has not been open and transparent, and we've been pushing for this because Jessica and I chatted yesterday about when you include the public, that's a benefit, because if you don't, then you're going to run into opposition, obviously, and you need the public support to get anything move forward. So I appreciate the comment and your attitude toward the public.
Great. Jessica, did you want to add in?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to add, so thank you, Skip. I think that's really important. And one of the roles of the Delta Science Program is really to help reduce conflict around science. So there is combat science. There are disagreements within the scientific community. And I think the science program is really moving forward and taking a leadership role within the Delta Science community right now in pushing for a review of this plan. To take on some of the hard issues and to look at what the science community at large is looking at in terms of governance and funding and needs and priorities for research. They did a lot of that work last year with the Science Action Agenda and in developing a document that looks at the priorities for research overall. So a lot of people are looking forward to this. It's coming at a right time.
Yeah.
At the State of the Estuary Conference, we were talking about it in a panel discussion about sort of where the science community goes overall in the Delta and sort of how we continue to build capacity for our science enterprise. And one of the big comments was, we need a science plan. And we said, great, we're working on an update of it. So it's going to be an exciting year for science community.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that a core value of the science program and the science plan is being open and transparent. I mean, and it's worth stating that, whenever and wherever you can, because it is the foundation, and I think that's a good message. I agree with Skip.
Great. I think that's been the message, and I'm happy to carry it forward. I think it is critical. Okay, so the last two items, I just wanted to give you a brief update on the recent symposium we had on managed relocation issues. Managed relocation is the idea that as climate is changing, the ideal conditions for species are going to be moving geographically. Many species that are the mobile species will be able to adjust to that, but some species may not be able to disperse to locations where there's better opportunities or better conditions. So managed relocation is the idea of assisting them or moving them to new locations. And it's a controversial approach. It's actually mostly a concept. It hasn't really been tried all that much as we're in the early phases of climate change, but people want to really be aware of how we could do that and what the challenges are with it. So this was a symposium to really discuss what the issues are around it, what the risks are. And I think, as you'll see there, one of the real challenges is understanding the risk and uncertainty around how to do those, what the impacts will be on native communities. If you move a species into a new place, you're going to affect some of those local species. And so there was just, I think, really a thoughtful discussion around a range of those issues, as well as some of the legal issues with endangered species, some of the economic issues. And so it wasn't as though it was really advocating that this is something we have to do. It was really more exploratory in terms of what are the trade-offs, what are the pros and cons around managed relocation, and how can we make ourselves aware of the range of different tools that we are going to need to use to manage species into the future with climate change. And I think we're likely to have a follow-up symposium to that in the coming year, probably in the fall, looking at those issues around salmon and salmon migration. So that's something that is on our radar and that we're just in the early phases of planning, but we'll let you know as those plans develop. And then the last thing to point out is the upcoming workshop for the Interagency Ecological Program, or IEP, and as was mentioned, you'll be hearing from the lead scientist, Steve Culberson from IEP in just a minute. And the annual workshop for the program is March 6th to 8th at Lake Folsom, or at Folsom, at Lake Natoma Inn in Folsom. And it's a 3-day workshop, annual workshop. I would say second to the Bay Delta Science Conference, it's really the scientific event for the Delta community. And so it's a big opportunity to discuss and learn about both science and management issues here in the Delta. There's 15 sessions over 3 days. There will be strong participation from the science program. I'll be giving a presentation to update the IEP members and community on the science program efforts for this coming year. Steve Brandt will give a presentation on the Independent Science Board, and actually 2 other Independent Science Board members will be giving presentations, and a number of our staff will be giving posters or presentations. So it's definitely a significant event, and those of you who are here in the audience, I would encourage you to register. Consider submitting a poster as well. The posters the deadline is February 6th, so there's still an opportunity to register or present posters. And I think the workshop sells out almost every year, so it's definitely high interest. So if any questions?
Questions of Dr. Callaway? Susan?
I wanted to go back to the managed relocation
Yes.
item. I'm fascinated by the last bullet on page 4 about how does terminology, for example, assisted migration versus managed relocation versus reciprocal transplant, affect the ease of permitting process. That's, what were some of the
Actually,
thoughts?
I did not sit in on that session, so I will find out
Okay.
and update you.
I'd like to know if it facilitates permitting.
Yeah, I'll update you.
Anything else?
Okay, so then I'll turn it over to Catherine Courtier, who's going to give us an update of By the Numbers, her final By the Numbers update for the council. I'll mention that Catherine is moving on to Sea Grant. Actually, she's a Sea Grant fellow. Sea Grant was so impressed with her work that they've hired her to help facilitate and coordinate the Sea Grant Fellowship Program as well as other work. So we'll have a good connection with the Sea Grant program.
Good morning, council members and Chair Fiorini. I'm sad and also excited to be here presenting my last By the Numbers report to all of you, but I feel, as John mentioned, that this report will be in good hands in the future. So as you will see, we don't have as quite high precipitation values as we would hope to have for this time of the year, especially compared to the wet year we had in 2017. Just to give you a little context, the amount of rain that has currently been measured in the northern Sierras is about 34 inches less than we had at this time of the year in 2017, 10 inches less than in 2016, and 4 inches less than in 2015. For the central Sierras, this 9 inches is measuring also 34 inches less than in 2017, 14 inches less than in 2016, and about the same as in 2015. For snowpack, we also have some lower values. The 3 inches of snow water equivalent that is currently measured is about 23 inches less than we experienced this time of the year in 2017, 17 inches less than in 2016, and about the same as 2015. So just kind of as a cursory thing to notice, a lot of our values for precipitation are very close to what we saw in 2015. In terms of what the rest of this water year will yield, there's kind of a mixed bag of people who think we could get a lot of precipitation later in the year. However, the likelihood of most of that being in the form of rain as opposed to snow is quite high, as the temperatures have been higher on average. A study was just done saying that this was one of the warmest years that we've had, I think, in the past 10 to 20 years, maybe. I don't think that number is quite right, but something along those lines, so it's pretty striking. If we move on to our water supply for reservoir storage, all of these numbers are looking good, outside of the construction still going on at Oroville, but these averages are well above their average, and actually very similar to what we saw this time last year. So for flow, I'm now realizing, I'm not sure if you can see on the monitors in front of you. I think I'll have somebody print this out for the next one, but in response to a comment at last month's council meeting, just kind of requesting a little more context on some of the flow and salinity numbers, I worked with Dr. Callaway to put together some graphs, which I'm now seeing are very small. My apologies on that, but just to kind of give a 12-month perspective about some of the values we've seen, the 3 locations, and kind of just so you can also compare those and see how changes in the flow might affect changes in salinity. So overall for flow, these current values for 2018 are much lower than they were in 2017. The Sacramento River at Freeport last year was 48,000 CFS higher than it currently is now. At Vernalis, it was 9,000 CFS higher than now, and the combined diversion is about 4,000 CFS less than it was at this time of last year. Looking at our salinity values, where we also have some ranges of what the approximate values are in parts per million, just sitting right there under the electrical conductivity values. Overall, these values are kind of on the lower side, especially considering the flows decreased. At Freeport, this is very similar to what we saw in 2017, just with some slight increases at Vernalis and at the CVP and SWP. Moving on to fish numbers, the second part of the fall midwater trawl abundance indices has been released. So in November, I reported the first half of these values to you, which was the September to October index values, and earlier this month, the entire index for 2017 was released. And so the index value for Delta smelt is 2, which is the lowest in fall midwater trawl history. There were only 2 Delta smelt found in September, and none were found in November, December, or October. For longfin smelt, the current abundance index for 2017 is 141, and this is the highest value since 2013 when it was measured in at 164. And there were in total 70 longfin smelt that were caught at different index stations. For age 0 striped bass, this index is currently the highest since 2001, and in total 399 striped bass were found at various index stations. And also, just to make a point, the index number is not the number of fish that were collected. It's computed with various formulas that I'd be more than happy to supply more information on if anybody is curious. And with that, that concludes the by the numbers report.
Catherine, thank you. Any questions? Patrick?
On the water quality flow chart, does that say that flows are bad but exports are good?
No, it's just using, because flows are green. I mean, because exports are green. No, so it's just using that, the green is if it's close to the average. So it's not any judgment, it's just how close they are to the long-term average. So it is true that the inflows are lower and the outflows are pretty consistent. If you look back at the graph, the longer-term graph, you'll see that the outflows are pretty consistent and haven't gone up, they've just remained constant. So they're similar to average. We're still withdrawing the similar amounts as we have in the past, even though the inflows are lower at this time of year.
Just a comment on that. While the number was greater last year, for 2015 and 2016, those outflow numbers were actually very similar to what we're experiencing this year. So as Dr. Calloway had mentioned, that percentage, and as consequence, the color is just a reflection of the comparison to the long-term average. So with the really high values we got last year, that kind of has changed the long-term average. But if you look, and I will actually send an email to all of you after the council meeting with a better image of the graphs that I created so you can really see that it's more consistent with what we've seen in past years.
Yeah, I think some of the consistency in the flow is because the winter run salmon, the exporters have to manage flow around certain windows, and that may be why it kind of is a steady state and not really seeing it go up or down. So they're constrained anyway. That's typically in January they're pretty constrained. That's why you've got so much water in San Luis, as they've pre-positioned it there. I think that's some of what you're seeing in those flow numbers.
Okay, anything else? Then, Catherine, thank you for your service. Thank you for perfecting by the numbers to a satisfactory level for all the council members. And best wishes as you move to San Diego and continue with the Sea Grant program. Stay in touch. Thanks. Anything else, John?
Nope, that's it. That concludes our
Okay,
report.
great, thanks. Any public comment requests? Very good. Now we are on to file item number 9, Dr. Steve Culbertson. We have the privilege of seeing Steve in the office frequently, as our offices are on the same floor, and had the opportunity to get to know Steve over the last year or so, and looking forward to hearing your explanation of the interagency ecological program and helping us to fit all the puzzle pieces of science in the Delta together so we completely understand how everything interrelates.
That's the aspiration. Thank you to the chair. Thank you to the council members. Interestingly, when I put this talk together, I found that there are quite a number of parallels between your duties and aspirations and the duties and aspirations of the IEP. I hope they'll become evident as we go along. But I also am under the impression that perhaps this is a reintroduction for you to the IEP. We had a lapse where there was no IEP lead scientist, and so someone wasn't reporting regularly, and I'm hoping that if you enjoy my comments or have things that you'd like to ask for follow-up on, that I'm interested in coming back and making this a more regular visit. So thank you all for your time. I did want to address the questions that are in your packet. What is the IEP? What does the IEP do? How does the IEP pursue its mission? And what is the relationship of the IEP to the Stewardship Council and vice versa? I think we've heard a couple times just recently in today's presentations, what we're really about is support for an interagency collaborative science in this age of institutional change and revision. A couple of additional notes from me as I begin my comments, perhaps for some credibility and relevancy. Prior to becoming the IEP lead scientist, I was an environmental specialist with DWR in the Sassoon Marsh branch. So I have some notion of what the agencies are pursuing with regard to permits and water operations in Sassoon and the Delta. In 2007, I was working with the Bay Delta Science Authority Science Program. I was a liaison to the IEP Science Management Team at that time. In 2009, when I moved to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I was a liaison there for the Bay Delta office of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to the IEP Science Management Team. And as you're aware, about a year ago now, I was appointed to be the IEP lead scientist. A couple of things on my radar for this year, just so you'll know, and to put some context in what it is I'm thinking about. I tried to do an annual review following my first year. I gave a report to the IEP directors in December. It's been suggested that I write that up as a short paper, so that should be available in the coming weeks, so that you'll have a sense of, or can refer to a document that will give you a description of sort of what I've been tracking over the last year, what IEP has been tracking over the last year. And then one of the things that I know the science program is working very hard on and that we take very much to heart in IEP, and it's been actually one of the things that I've found us most lacking in successes over the years from the program, and that is the issue of science communication. And I know that there are quite a few resources invested in really great world-class science, and I think it's probably true or fair to say that most of you probably don't know about most of it, and one of the things I have in front of me for the coming year, and with the science program's help, is to make that information available and accessible to people like yourselves. So I have it as a personal ambition this year to create some communication products and tell you about the science that's going on so that it's relevant to what you do in your council duties. Then before I begin my comments specifically, I wanted to revisit the IEP mission and vision so that you have a context for what I'm going to talk about today. And very simply, the vision for IEP is the highest quality science contributing to achieving a reliable and sustainable water supply and a healthy Bay Delta ecosystem. The IEP mission is to provide and integrate relevant and timely ecological information for the management of the Bay Delta ecosystem and the water that flows through it. There are more statements there, but I think that's the gist. The short version is the IEP is the group that monitors the estuary and tries to inform the impact of water project operations. I'd also like to point out that monitoring includes fish and wildlife, as well as their food, zooplankton, phytoplankton, and water quality, and it's not just about tracking listed species. My personal interest and the organization's general interest is in the processes that come together that actually form the Bay Delta ecosystem. So we realize that our bread and butter is informing impacts of water projects and helping to improve water supply reliability, but we also have a deep-seated interest in understanding the ecology of the Bay Delta as well. So now to the first slide that you see before you, I wanted to comment the inception of this program goes back at least 40 years, founded probably in an interest, not probably, founded in an interest in understanding the dynamics of striped bass, an introduced species as a sport fish. I think some of the other early surveys that we had tracked sturgeon populations in the estuary. So the IEP's been around for a while. We've had our ups and downs, and we have, like any good family of 9 members, we have our arguments and our occasional disagreements, but we generally end up back at Thanksgiving together saying thank you for the last year and looking forward to working with each other for the next year. One of the things that I'm trying to add is the slogan you see across the top of the logo that's been around for a long time, and that is an emphasis on science, synthesis, and service. And you're free to ask me more about that if you'd like, but I do believe that the core of the program is quality science. I do believe that one of the things that we can add value to moving into the future is synthesis of the information that we are collecting and should be providing to you. And then the last is my deep-seated commitment to public service and to leadership of an organization that provides useful service to those who are funding what we do. A couple of things that you'll hear me talk about, particularly if you manage to look at the 5 points paper, this year in review document that I'm going to be putting together that will be available, is that even though the program has morphed through time and even though there have been various shapes and flavors of leadership, the commitment to open science, which you were just asking Dr. Callaway about, to what I call centers of excellence of science, to interagency operability of the data, to places where collaboration can occur, like the Rivers facility that's been proposed for Rio Vista, and for leveraging the science enterprise and the science leadership at the Bay Delta Science Program, or the Delta Science Program rather, is really one of the things I think we should emphasize. So getting into the mechanics of the interagency program and its organization. The first thing I have to say upon displaying an organizational chart is there's something of a mythology about the brick and mortar nature of the IEP that I think many people bring to the discussions that we have. There is no place where IEP is, and no particular group of people who decide on a daily basis what IEP does and then gives mandates to the agencies. In fact, we are an interagency collaborative. You see the top tier here is the agency directors. There are 9 of them, and we're working on an MOU to finally include the Stewardship Council and the Delta Science Program as a member of that group. And I understand we're very close on that effort at this point. And the decisions that get made by an IEP are actually the 9 agencies making those decisions. So I wanted to characterize what I think are an attribution to maybe a small group of people about what goes on about investing science resources when we monitor and describe what's going on in the Delta. And in fact, it's actually a 9 or soon to be 10 agency agreement about that. So much of what we do on an annual basis reflects the decisions that have been made at these agencies, and not some additional agency that's telling all these other 9 or 10 agencies what to do. So that's a common misperception that I've found. The other thing is that with 9 or 10 agencies cooperating in these various levels, and I'll go through this chart briefly in a second, there are 9 or 10 different opinions about how things should be done. And I know this is something that the Stewardship Council has to endure as well. You've got a lot of contributing members, lots of different perspectives, and they all have to be considered. So it can be a challenge to understand and to describe a coherent program of study. Fortunately, I think for us, we have the benefit of being able to really sort of coalesce around what we consider to be world-class and quality science. And with the science program's help and others, the academic community, I think we do that. And so one of the things that even after all the Thanksgiving discussions and the family disagreements, one thing that we seem to be able to coalesce around is doing quality science and finding the resources and arrangements for people to get together and talk about that science. So just to describe briefly, we have an agency group of directors that sort of provide the uppermost decision-making capabilities for us. All the directors have to sign off on annual budgets and programs, plans of research. The next box down is the coordinators. In my mind, this is where most of the agency decision-making gets done. These are frontline managers who have the ability to assign staff to do various things. They frequently preside over programmatic budgets. And we frequently have at the coordinators meetings, monthly meetings, very lively discussions about decisions made for where to dedicate resources within the particular agencies. And the idea is that if you do that with 9 people, 10 people in the room, that there can be some coordination that can be achieved by having those discussions together rather than having them separately in all of the agencies. So that's the second box down. The next level down is sort of where I've cut my teeth, and that's in the science management team and in the technical arena, and then of course with the small program support team. And in my mind, this is where the real achievements accrue to the program. This is where the scientists actually get together and develop complementary programs of sampling and analysis. It's where you'll hear me talk a little bit more. You have so far about in the introduction about synthesis. It's this group of people and this group of expertise, sort of the senior and middle level scientific staffs at all of these various agencies that really get the heart and soul of the program going, and the achievements that they accrue here, I think, are really what we crow about. What I think is what we need to communicate better to you. So that's that middle tier there. The lower tier, all those various boxes, those are meant to give you a flavor. I think it's all of them. There may be 1 or 2 more that are about to be formed, but these are what we call project work teams. And this is where we try to reach outside of agency staff and include the interested public and any other technically oriented agency or academic participants in these work groups. And you'll see there's a telemetry work group and a Delta Smelt work group. And this is where we have open and frank discussions about ideas that need to be suffused and brought together to inform our science management plans and the annual plan that we put together for approval every year. And so that group of people runs into the hundreds and forms many of the couple of hundred people that you'll see at the IEP workshop in March that Dr. Callaway mentioned. So that's our attempt to try and broaden the suite of information that we avail ourselves of as we go about the annual workings of the IEP, even though the bulk of that does in fact occur at these science management team and program support team levels that are by MOU and agreement amongst the agencies within the agencies themselves. So we acknowledge that there's things going on outside of the agencies, and we have a mechanism, we think, that tries to reach outside and gather that information. So where does the money go? IEP has an approximately $33 million annual budget. We spend this money on surveys and boats and nets and storage of materials and samples, archiving them, disposing of waste streams generated by analyzing those samples, We have people who identify the specimens, people who generate reports about what they collect. We've got people who concern themselves with permitting, with communicating this information up and down the organizational chart. We try to spend as much of our time as possible in collaborative scientific meetings where we share information and understanding. People are employed to do analysis and writing and publishing, reviewing the research plans that the IEP tries to pursue in any given year. We spend a fair amount of time arguing over what's important. We spend a lot of time in meetings, and then we have a few workshops that actually are useful to get things done. So in my mind, one of the things that really you should know about is that the IEP and IEP-affiliated scientists last year published over 50 peer-reviewed manuscripts. And in my mind, it represents a minimum of $5 million of science productivity. And as I said, I'm not sure you guys know a whole lot about it. So we're going to work in this coming year to tell you more about what's in there and what you should know because of what we've done within the IEP. Certainly the science program is communicating you portions of that, but I think we can do a better job in telling you about what it is this $5 million we spent in a $30 million program is telling us over time. So what does the IEP do? Well, we collect data. Much more is available, and we'll talk a lot about this at the IEP workshop in Folsom, March 6th to 8th, which Dr. Callaway mentioned. Increasingly through time, we're spending proportionately less of our time surveying, although the surveys are out there and we have to do them, but more and more people are trying to spend their time analyzing and synthesizing that data and trying to figure out what it actually means. And I think that's an important growth area for the IEP. We've really been upping our game, I think, in terms of communicating across and within disciplines. And one of the emphasis, as you saw reflected in our updated logo, is synthetic efforts. Trying to get people who work on salmon to talk to people who work on sturgeon, to talk to people who work on restoration in the Delta, to talk to people who work on water supply issues in the upper estuary. The fact that all of those people can get together using IEP data that's collected for one or more purposes is a real benefit, we think. And I would argue that that is, without a doubt, one of the values we offer to organizations such as the Council. One of the interesting things, and I'm having this conversation with many of the science program staff now, and it's one of the more intriguing conversations we have, and I'd love to go into it with you in more detail at future meetings, and that is this notion of how are we confronting the era of big data and open science and collaboratives using big data and open science. I think we're going to see a lot more automation of some of this data collection, at least the environmental condition collection, and we're going to really profit from collaborations and arrangements that utilize the open sharing of data and perhaps even issues of machine learning to help us get a handle on what it is we're collecting. I look forward to looking for your support for those kinds of efforts in the future, and I think it's really the way the Delta and monitoring in the Delta and the estuary should be going, and I think we should be planning for it. And that may sound a little bit like Greek to you for now, perhaps not, hopefully not, but I look forward to being able to try to explain those notions for you more fully in the future. I think it's going to be an important part of our future in the Delta. So all of that data has to be important somehow, right? And how does it get from the boat to the boardroom, as I say? This data gets used for many purposes. One of them that I think is worth describing is the Delta smelt migration season, which we're in now, and how the operations of the state and Central Valley projects are managed with that environmental data in mind. And the slide on your screen here is one I have from it's actually housed at the Bay Delta Fish and Wildlife Office. It's a portal into the workings of the smelt working group with which I'm sure you're familiar. And this is where what I think the policy and the environmental science rubber meets the road. This is the place where all those numbers that you collect and that Catherine has described for you on occasion sort of get into the policymakers' realm. And again, a group of interagency scientists and program managers openly discuss the meanings of that data and that's collected and make various recommendations to the water management community via the smelt working group. I'm sure many of you are familiar with those operations. In this case, because of the way that water is moved through the system and the way the delta smelt, in this case, actually move in response to that water movement in the wintertime, normally, entrainment of those fish into the water projects is a focus. More and more, we're moving to larger issues that have become important for the IEP to get a better handle on, and that's things like water chemistry, contaminants, where does the carbon actually come from, where does the turbidity that the smelt seem to be attracted to come from, and how is it managed. But many of those discussions are fueled and are discussed, are fueled and are hashed out in these interagency working groups that make various recommendations to the Bureau and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Steve, question?
Sure.
Steve, I'm curious, is this where a person could ask whether or not more functional flows are making what kind of difference and in what way?
Good question. So the conversations in the SMELT working group are bounded very specifically by the biological opinions and their requirements for how the service gets recommendations from the IEP and others, and what they would make as recommendations to the water project managers. So to the extent that that conversation is bounded by what's in the biological opinions, yes, that's in fact exactly what those discussions are for. I think if you were looking to change the boundaries of that discussion, that's kind of the era that we're coming into next with the discussions at the Water Board and the reconsultation for the biological opinions. I think all of that is in front of us in the next several years.
And I just want to get a sense of the timing. So when you say that these agencies have these discussions, take a look at the water operations for a particular time frame, that informs the next set of actions for that water year or long term?
Good question again. These are typically weekly meetings during what is known as the entrainment season. So typically winter and early spring, December through March or April. So that's when the delta smelt are typically known to move to spawning grounds, spawn, and then the adults move away from the spawning grounds, and then the larvae are left to move around in the delta. So it's typically weekly during December through March or April, and the end of the season is typically when the temperature gets above spawning temperatures. And so there are weekly discussions about what level of exports or export reductions need to be adhered to or recommended to the service so that we can avoid large entrainment events at the state and federal facilities.
One last question. How often does this group evaluate the effect of the actions and, record that effect and monitor the long-term trends?
Again, a good question. Effects on the population are generally evaluated annually in terms of population estimates, not necessarily directly by this group, but by IEP and affiliated scientists. I think this group is more one that sets an adjustment to water operations based on input from the scientific community about where the fish are and how likely they are to be entrained. And then we typically try to avoid entrainment. If we're successful at avoiding entrainment, generally conditions are left like they are, so there will be no additional adjustments recommended to the operators. But if there's continuing or increased entrainment, there typically would be an evaluation of that and maybe a recommendation to reduce the project operations effect on entrainment. So that's done on a weekly basis, and having been for a while in the Fish and Wildlife Service office where these discussions end up, they can be daily or even hourly, depending on the time of year and how critical and how many fish were in training. But so typically they're done weekly, and adjustments are made, and then we see what happens the next week.
Does your group share information? Is it open to outsiders?
Yes. So all of the data that's collected is made available on the websites. Some of it more findable than others, but all of it is available. One of the issues that I discussed about or was intending to sort of package with my notions of needing better science communication are in fact a response to sometimes it can be a little more than 2 or 3 clicks to find the information on the internet, for example. So we're looking to up our game in terms of making that information more available to managers.
Is the group's primary reason for being to advise the state and federal water project?
So the SMELT working group advises state and federal water project operations during the SMELT entrainment season. That's a specific use of IEP data that's generated for more general purposes.
Are there others like that where your collective deliberations and research is intended to inform or advise the water projects?
On an operational basis, it's not tied so tightly the way the smelt information is, the way some of the salmon information is. We are charged with trying to understand the estuary at large, and what is the effect of hydrology on the estuary, and that includes climate as well as water project operations. So one of the things that we're trying to do is to provide these syntheses that I've been discussing. A drought synthesis, for example, we had a flow-related synthesis after the most recent prior wet season in 2011. The Delta Smelt Mast, we called it. There was an attempt to put together a report that described what happened and how the smelt populations at large responded to the last wet season. So there wasn't a call for what sort of operational changes would you make based on a wet year, but it was more a call of what environmental changes would be important for water managers to have in mind when they convene a group like the SMELT Working Group, which does in fact inform water project operations. Does that make sense?
No. Do you advise the CVP or the State Water Project to pump less or do something differently?
No. We try to characterize for anyone who's interested the state of the ecosystem within which water project operations occur. And then we are charged...
What does that mean?
So the ecosystem itself, and I'm going to talk...
well, just stick to the smelt, because that's a good example, and that sounds like the most important direct one you have currently.
Yeah, but the smelt occur in an ecosystem that...
So we see, and it's in the news, that there aren't any smelt.
Right.
So what does your group recommend to water managers?
We tell water managers how many smelt we've found and under what conditions we've found them. And it's up for the interagency operational groups and the so project operators and regulatory agencies to decide what those operations should be.
Do you advise them? Do you make recommendations as to what they should do or shouldn't do?
Officially, no. But many scientists certainly share their opinions about what they think.
So there's 6 federal agencies and
Yes.
3 state and
Yes.
maybe 4 with us.
Right.
But do you vote?
We don't. There are membership rosters for the SMELT working group, for example.
Do you have minutes or reports?
They do.
Or
They
recommendations?
publish their minutes after each weekly meeting, and they typically post, I believe they're called determinations, that they recommended. That
So
the
would a
Fish and Wildlife
report
Service made.
say, we found no smelt, we think the reasons are these, based on science and input,
Right.
and then that's it? Then the managers of the water projects take it from there, and that's...
In consultation with the regulatory agencies, yes.
Right. Well, but within your group, you have regulatory agencies.
So we don't make regulatory decisions within the IEP. We
Right.
collect the
No, I
environmental
understand
data
that.
and we pass that along to
But
a work group, in this particular case.
The
to
Water
SMELT
Resources
work.
Control Board is in your group, and they're a
Right.
regulatory agency.
Right.
But in that discussion, they don't opine what ought to happen.
Not in the data collection mandate for the IEP itself, no. Those decisions are left to the individual agencies to make as they have their own decision-making and regulatory response structures.
Do you, with a look back of the prior year, you referenced that, the reports, do you say, or the water projects, since that's who you're advising, say with SMELT, when we look back, we see this happened and it was good, whether we recommended it or not, or this happened and it didn't work out, and these are the reasons. And maybe one of the reasons some of the time would be not paying attention to some of the data you've collected. Does that ever happen?
That specific instance, perhaps. I will say that the look back that you're talking about typically is something that takes months to years to actually put together to the satisfaction of the science community. So the retrospectives, I mean, we have issued reports on what we thought happened and why the SMELT behaved the way it did. For example, in 2011, the last wet year, we're currently collecting information on what has been happening over the last wet period in 2016 and 17. Those numbers are beginning to be made available, and the idea is that within a year or two, we would have a report that would basically reflect the state of the science on what we think happened.
What would be an example where the projects followed the science advice that was developed or promulgated in the group?
Yeah, so science advice, I'm not sure that's a term I'm comfortable with. There have been...
well, you spoke to the interaction of research and data collection, science, and policy, and in the middle, it's still a little fuzzy.
Yes, very much so. So I think that we have been able to, for example, in the most recent experience with which I'm familiar, there has been an attempt to characterize much more carefully the events and conditions leading up to movement of delta smelt into areas that actually are entrainable via operation of the state and federal water project pumps. And until those conditions are met, we are reasonably sure that you're not going to entrain delta smelt, because the delta smelt just don't show up until the water is of a certain temperature, until there's a certain turbidity, until there's a certain salinity. So we've been able to tell the operators, not the IEP scientists, but the program managers who are required to inform the operators. We think we can pump appreciably until conditions change. And this was what you were asking about. So the information that we collect says we think it's okay to pump for now. It looks like it's going to rain next week. We should look at it carefully, maybe not wait till Monday. Maybe we should look at it Wednesday if
In
flows
your experience,
increase.
they take your advice when you do that?
Yes. Well, yes. Again, those decisions and recommendations are made in the SMELT working group. They try to avail themselves of all the available material that are out there, and you know, only a portion of that is scientific in nature. Correct.
Well,
So there
what you said the science management team was the heart of this whole collective science.
Yeah.
Right. So what else besides science goes into this?
So that's a different sort of question. Appreciate that. When there are proposals for additional surveys, for example, one of the places where we derive value is having the discussion about the value of a new proposal or a new proposed survey among the scientists who are already out there routinely surveying. And sometimes the survey proposals make complete sense. They fill a gap. If we have the resources, if we have the people who can actually identify what we're collecting, that makes sense. In some cases, the scientists would get together, and I think there are very few other venues where this occurs. They would say, you know, we're already doing that. We have a station 300 meters up the river that would satisfy your needs.
Well, isn't this under the heading that scientific research begets more scientific research?
No, sir. No, sir. This is where you are able to avoid duplication of efforts by having a venue where agency scientists of all colors and flavors get together and talk about what's being collected and why it's being collected.
So on your organizational chart, the box science management team is answerable to coordinators who are answerable to agency directors.
Yes.
You said, besides the science, other things get considered. So what other things that aren't science, that aren't within you and your colleagues' control?
So this is a data collection and analysis organization. We pass that information on to the regulators and the operators, and the discussions about regulation and operation of the water projects occurs in a different venue.
Okay.
Susan's going to clear this up.
Oh, no, I'm not. Actually, that was an excellent exchange. I just wanted to offer an observation that were it not for programs like the SMELT Working Group and the IEP, when the regulatory side of the House, whether it be National Marine Fisheries Service or U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, offers up a biological opinion or reasons why the water projects ought to be operated in a different way, they are getting the best available science from organizations like IEP. My wish is that discussions would go outside the bounds of the biological opinion and begin to explore the trend analyses and the long-term net effects of all these actions that we keep taking in a sort of mechanical, reactionary way to certain water years or certain other considerations like an energy crisis, et cetera, and begin to look at, okay, here we are all wanting more natural functional flows. How are we doing? Are we making progress? Is it really making a difference in terms of not only the species but the ecosystem function? And so I'm understanding why it's very difficult to separate these two aspects. The science needed to make good regulatory decisions, which Seth is obviously quite interested in. But there's also this longer term overall natural resource management question. I don't know if there is a body devoted to that.
Yeah, well, you certainly can't get 30 or 40 scientists in a room and have discussions about specifics of biological opinions without having them also think about these other things. One of the examples that I was hoping to have a chance to describe today was the story of the pelagic organism decline. So the environmental monitoring that we've got in the estuary is predicated on compliance with either water rights decisions or biological opinions, and that's why that work has been funded. But after collecting several decades worth of data and to no particular regulatory need, there were some scientists who were regarding the data that had been collected over time and noticed that there were some remarkable characteristics of that data if you allowed yourself to look beyond a single species, in this case delta smelt, and allow your purview to begin to consider, American shad, threadfin shad, young of the year striped bass, longfin smelt. And that was when some of these creative types, and at a venue that I described earlier, which I thought was where the real meat and potatoes of these discussions are, they sort of began to say, well, I looked at this data set and look at the characteristics of this entire suite of species that's been occurring over time. I know we're concerned about delta smelt, and we move that information up through channels to the smelt working group, but there's this whole other suite of things that are going on that perhaps we should consider. And one of the again, that was post hoc, years after that data had been collected, and only through the creative services of some of our most qualified and experienced researchers and agency scientists did they put together the picture of not only was the delta smelt having trouble, but there was a whole productivity decline in the estuary writ large. And ultimately, we made connections with things like the clam invasion and the consumption of phytoplankton at the very bottom of the food web. And it rippled its way all the way up through 3, 4, 5, maybe 7 species. And that wasn't known or written about until maybe 2007, 2006. And we didn't actually specifically collect data about that. But it was the ability of the scientists to work in this collective environment that I described, with time to analyze the environmental data that they had been collecting as a suite of data and not for a particular purpose or a particular species, that we're really building that understanding. And to my mind, this is what I was trying to describe about where the sort of meat and potatoes of that good science can occur, and what I think is exciting about having an interagency ecological program that collects data about more than just the mandated species.
Ken? Steve, I hope you didn't want to finish your presentation before you took questions.
I'm here at your pleasure.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's what I realized. So, no, I think this is a really good discussion, and I appreciate.
I can come back, by the way, if you get hungry. I know I'm between you and lunch here, so.
This sort of better understanding kind of your role now, and knowing that it is biological opinion driven, and there is somebody in the maybe not that room with the 40 scientists, but there is somebody who's got, the significant ability to react to the information that you're providing, which is really the regulated agencies, Fish and Wildlife or NIMS or whoever it is. How, what you're doing, what I'm more interested in is how, our science program and your group sort of interact, work together. How does our science plan agenda or your activities integrate with our science plan agenda? How because all of that, we're sort of skipping to, okay, well, I've got data, we've got data, and we're informing policy. Well, you could be confusing because we're not, without integration and coordination, we're not quite sure what's more important, what's the right thing to do. At least I am, from my perspective. So maybe you and maybe John can talk about how you work together and coordinate, and is your agenda similar to our agenda on research and monitoring?
Yeah, so that's a prescient comment. As John described, they're in the process of updating their science plan. The IEP is now undertaking this year an update to its own science strategy, And we feel as though there are significant interdigitations of the desires and consistencies to be made on behalf of the community at large, the scientific community at large, for being consistent about what we think are priorities. One thing I will say is I think the science program's purview is larger. I think IEP is only one part of what is the Delta science, the One Delta, One Science that we speak about. As I mentioned, I think our sweet spot is basic ecological functioning and monitoring, and pursuant specifically to the biological opinions and the water rights decisions. But there's more that should be known outside that, and I think the Delta Science Plan is thinking about that. And for one, I see the Delta Science Plan as sort of providing an overarching umbrella under which the IEP's particular expertise and responsibility fits. But there are other people and other organizations out there that also fit under that same rubric.
Yes, but are we coordinated? I mean, we're all sort of, you in your end of things, trying to achieve the co-equal goals because you're balancing.
Yeah, well, in my mind, as a response, and I don't mean to be flip, we coordinate down to, you know, we think this study is really worthwhile, but we don't have enough money for it. Can you help? And then we say, oh yeah, you know, that is important for us. We'll help in that regard, and that goes both ways. So I think to the extent that we're coordinating to that level, I think that's pretty useful, and I think that nails what you're asking.
Steve Reiner has moved closer to the presenters table. Would you like to ask him to join you?
Well, that's a good opportunity to hear how do we, you know, when we're developing the science agenda and prioritizing and kind of looking out into the future, well, how do we look at the work of the IEP and how do we sort of integrate all this?
Please, Reiner.
Thank you. In a nutshell, the easiest way to describe how the Delta Science Program and the IEP is collaborating and integrating their work plans, even down to that level, is the IEP has boots in the water and in the mud, boats on the water, nets, and they're basically generating the data. The science program figures out how we can fill some of the information gaps that the IEP's mission doesn't allow them to do because they have a regulatory, they're driven by regulatory programs and mandates like through the Endangered Species Act and the Clean Water Act and the Water Code. So the science program assists with wherever they can with the synthesis activities that IEP scientists try to do, but oftentimes can't do as quickly as the community wants to because they have other emergencies of the day that they need to take care of. And we provide research funding where the IEP mandate doesn't allow to fill the gaps or glue pieces together. So we're integrating our work plans very closely and then finding out where are the top priorities that really could inform management priorities in the long term, where the science program can help with our allocated research funding through the science action agenda. So we're coordinating very closely with the boats on the water and everything that IEP does. They're really the data generators. So we're coordinating where we can help through additional resources, either people or contract funds, to augment what IEP does and create a better picture of what the real story is and how all these interacting factors and stressors on the system can be sorted out, teased out, and where we can find out where the management knobs are that we might be able to turn to make a beneficial impact. I hope that explains it.
That's what I was curious about.
Also, let me just add, I think, so the establishment was before my time, but I know intentionally the science program hosted or housed the position for the IEP lead scientist specifically to facilitate that integration. So Steve works here in our office, and so there's direct communication on a daily basis between Steve and all of the staff in terms of making sure that collaboration is taking place. And then there's science program participation in the coordinator level. So Darcy Austin participates in the IEP coordinators group. But I would also add that in terms of the science plan update, that's something that we are very mindful of and really thinking about, not just collaborating and coordinating with IEP, but coordinating with IEP and the CAMPT group and all of the other organizations that clearly the IEP is, as Reiner said, the group that's collecting the data. But we need to be sure that we're making those connections with all of the other groups that are either doing other research projects or using that data to make decisions.
Thank you. Glad to hear it.
All right.
So, Mr. Chairman, in the interest of time, I can either continue, give you a brief view. We've discussed many things that are certainly on my mind to discuss with you into the future. I'm sort of at your leisure. I know you have other items to consider and lunch, and I don't want to usurp more of your time. We're well past what I had thought I was going to be here for, but I'm willing to go through the rest of my slides and that information, but it's up to you.
You have a half a dozen slides to go?
I think I've only got about 3 left.
Okay. Give us the high-level overview, and if there's a need for more detail, we can invite you back.
You know, you guys may be better than I am because we may have talked about much of this.
Well, it's been a very worthwhile conversation. At the risk of complicating things, I've spent a fair amount of time in an emergency room with a family member lately, and it's frustrating in that setting with the data that's being collected. You want, in support of your family member, action to be taken. And I think that's some of the frustration that you may sense around here is that IEP is collecting all this data. Let's do something with it. Let's improve conditions. And you're telling us that there are several steps and others that have to utilize that data. As Reiner has explained, the science program synthesizes information and helps. There are multiple entities involved in ultimately getting to a decision that hopefully leads to improved conditions. And it may be a condition such as in the emergency room sometimes where increasing water temperature may trump I don't want to use that word, may override any of the other, maybe the super stressor that may be we're incapable of dealing with. So,
yeah, I appreciate your comments.
Thanks for explaining what you do.
I appreciate your comments. I think one of the things that is a challenge for me and that I've set as an ambition this year is to make these conversations that we're having happen and to inform them in a way that's useful for you. I think, I'm sort of coming from the, university-trained scientist, researcher sort of point of view, some time ago, but I've spent a fair amount of time at the agencies now, and I'm not happy yet with our ability to communicate one to another, and that's one of the things that I think is a challenge for me now. I represent a lot of really good world-class science, and I need to find a way to make it relevant to you and to be responsive to your questions.
So, Steve, I think given the time, maybe the next opportunity for you to come, it seems to me like the issue that is top of mind is how do all of these activities coordinate to lead to improved conditions? And it may be that we need a panel of more than just you, but it's a constant question that comes up. At DPIC, it comes up nearly every time. How do all these multiple activities and entities integrate to lead to improving conditions? So if you're satisfied that the information that you came to impart to us has mostly occurred through your presentation and the interaction, then maybe we could agree to set up another time when we can continue this conversation.
Yes, I am. And I'm happy that you'll invite me back. I think that's really the aim here.
Okay. All right. Anything else on this matter? All right. Then are there any requests for public comment? Well, then we will recess now for lunch. It is 11:50. How about if we return at 12:40? Okay. 12:40, back here.
Going to item 10, yeah?
Well, that's next on the agenda, but I'm going to break from the agenda just briefly.
All right. We are ready.
Very good. Thank you, Bob. We are reconvening after a lunch break. And before we begin with file item number 10, which is the next item on the agenda, I'm going to use the chairman's prerogative to introduce a couple of friends who surprised me today. Seated way in the back is Dr. Samuel Huddleston, my oldest friend. We grew up together, attended elementary school together, played baseball together, and is somebody that I very much cherish and appreciate. The other special guest just flew in from Ghana, Africa, Dr. Godwin Elijah. You may recall that it was just a little over a year ago that I went to Ghana and was led on a tour through the bush with Godwin and observed villages that had no safe drinking water. They basically were their water for living and drinking were mud puddles. And then we went to villages where Godwin's work has drilled wells and provided pumps, and the difference was incredible. Our family was so inspired that we contributed to drill a well and provide a pump for Alfia Junction, a village in the bush of Ghana. So I didn't know these two guys were going to be here today, and so it's a real treat. And so Godwin, welcome to the meeting of the Delta Stewardship Council. And Sam, thanks for transporting him from the airport.
I had a question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Sam, could Randy hit the curveball?
No. Actually, the battery mate, because we played against each other, his brother Buddy had a curveball that broke a foot. And Sam was the catcher. So when I'm up to bat and that curveball is coming, all I can hear is this roar of a laughter of me trying to get out of the way of the imaginary ball. So Sam would be honest if he told you I couldn't hit a curveball. All right. Okay. Reiner, thank you for your patience. And Jessica, you're going to introduce file item number 10 for us.
Yes. Thank you, Chair Fiorini. So file item number 10 is the 2017 year in review. I'd like to start by inviting our Deputy Executive Officer for Science, Dr. Reiner Hoenecke. You heard from him already today, but Reiner, if you'd like to join us. And then also Terry Gaines, who will be filling in for Cassandra Enos. And the two of them are really responsible for making sure that their respective divisions are carrying out priorities, and both for last year and for this year. So we're these two file items, both 10 and 11, year in review and look forward. We're going to be sort of referencing things back and forth, so they are separate agenda items. But you know, a lot of the work that we do does not neatly fit into one calendar year. It goes across calendar years, so we'll talk a little bit about that too. But last February 2017, staff presented the council with recommended priorities for the coming year, emphasizing activities to address implementation of the Delta Plan and the Delta Science Plan. Significant progress was made on all of these priorities. Some staff activities undertaken in 2017 warrant some special attention. I'm going to run through these. I've asked Terry and Reiner to be at the table. They aren't going to present anything in particular, but they're here to answer any questions or to engage in a discussion with the council members about what we accomplished last year. John joined us in August of last year, so he's also available to provide some context and for both the look back and the look ahead. So, in terms of planning, what the planning division did, and just really the council overall in terms of accomplishments on implementing the Delta Plan was, as you know, we are in the midst of amendments to the Delta Plan. The CEQA comment period just closed this past Monday on the set of 3 amendments. And this effort to develop the proposed amendments really was a major focus of our work last year, and you were very much involved in that work too. And it will be ongoing for the first part of this year. In addition, staff and consultants made good strides in early outreach and development of the ecosystem amendment. This work will be a focus in 2018. Staff also initiated a new online dashboard to track progress on implementation of the Delta Plan through individual projects, so that's Delta View, and through agency progress and action on administrative performance measures, and that's our administrative dashboard, and all of that information is online. The administrative dashboard has been really useful. We discussed it at a DPIC meeting last April, and you'll continue to hear more about that and progress on those administrative performance measures as we do the 5-year review on the plan. So last year, we hired a new Delta lead scientist. The council appointed Dr. John Calloway. Since joining us, he has really jumped into his role providing overall direction for the Delta Science Program and the science community, and we are very happy to have him here. The science program completed and released the 2017 to 2021 Science Action Agenda. We refer to this often. I would encourage anyone who hasn't had a chance to flip through it to do so. It really very clearly identifies where the research community in the Delta sees opportunities in terms of filling in gaps in understanding and really bringing the science community together around a few topics. The Delta Science Program has provided leadership on several major studies initiated in 2017. One of these you heard about recently at a council meeting, lessons learned from the drought. The synthesis report will be finalized in February, and we expect to bring you a copy of that. This work is really coming out of work that the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee did over a year ago, almost 2 years ago, to identify high-impact science actions. One of the major recommendations from that group was to identify what management actions were taken during the drought and what the effects of those management actions were. Also, the Delta Science Program, with other partners, has been developing a project that we call Operation Baseline, and this is to develop monitoring prior to the upgrades of the Sacramento Regional Sanitation District Treatment Plant. And so that work really started last year and will continue into next year until the upgrades happen and then after. And true to its charge in the Delta Reform Act to carry out the mission of synthesizing and communicating scientific information to policymakers and decision makers, during 2017, the Delta Science Program held 11 brown bag seminars, supported a major conference, the State of the Estuary, held 5 day-long symposium, 9 workshops, 4 reviews, and 3 scientific synthesis efforts and 4 peer-reviewed publications. So they did a tremendous amount of work really communicating to a broader audience about what was happening in the Delta, ranging on topics anywhere from invasive species, integrated modeling, structured decision-making, fish passage, long-term operations of the biological opinions, mercury, and there's a whole sort of long list of topics, but those are some main highlights. All in all, this is really a tremendous amount of work. It's been carried out by a group of brilliant and dedicated staff. And more information about our accomplishments and the accomplishments of the other agencies can be found in our annual report. So there's a draft annual report that's out. Council members have a copy, and it will be up on our website very soon. So, any questions?
Any questions before I call on Terry and Reiner to say a few words from Planning and Science? This annual report is really a reflection of the great work that our staff has done. And this is the reason why Terry and Reiner are at the table, because we want to give credit where credit is due. And we have a number of pretty big responsibilities, and our staff works very hard to deliver products and initiatives in a timely manner. So, Terry, thank you for all your work.
So in addition to what Jessica mentioned, and the planning division staff were extremely dedicated and busy this year with the amendments, but I also want to remind the council of our core regulatory function. We had 4 covered actions come through the council this year, and staff participated in 14 early consultations, or multiple meetings on some, but on 14 projects. Many of those we expect to come to the council this coming year. So it's a big job.
Any questions of Terry? Reiner?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to add a little comment to John's appointment as lead scientist. It was really a fortuitous and almost serendipitous event that John joined us at this time, because John, as you probably remember, is a wetlands restoration specialist, and it truly is fortuitous that he brings his expertise to us at this time as we amend the ecosystem chapter of the Delta Plan, and as we review and hopefully update the Delta Science Plan also. So I'm really pleased to have him for me to be his sidekick. So thank you. I'm really excited about John being here. So thank you for selecting him and appointing him. Also, I can't say enough about the work that staff has done on creating and the incredible work that went into the Science Action Agenda. Some of you may not be really aware how much interaction the development of that agenda took with all of our partners, from academia, from all of the DPIC agencies and the local agencies that have science capacity, like the state and federal water contractors, like the SAC regional science team of the SAC regional plant, and we've been fortunate to create this cadre of colleagues among the whole Delta science community that weighed in on the Science Action Agenda, helped inform it, and say, this is where you, as a science program, can make the largest difference. And we've followed up on a recommendation that really was articulated by way back when in 2013, when we first vetted the first and second drafts of the Delta Science Plan, as we briefed the council back then, and that had to do with we need to include not just the natural sciences in our Science Action Agenda, but also the social sciences, resource economics, risk perception by people. How can we integrate the natural science with the social science? And we're really making inroads now. You'll hear a little bit more about this when we talk about 2018 priorities, but that's one of our focus areas that we want to wrap our minds around, and that was a key recommendation too that came out of the 2016 Science Enterprise Workshop that we held in collaboration with USGS. Some of you were part of it. Randy was a key mover and shaker behind it. So all of that is now coming to us, and we are going to reflect it in our Delta Science Plan update too. So I'm really excited.
And Randy, I just wanted to mention too, so in the annual report, in the middle is a list of some of the accomplishments in 2017. So take a look through that. And I wanted to acknowledge all the efforts of Keith Coolidge and Brittany Young, who are in our communications group, for all of their hard work that went into this. And make a special note that we made an effort this year in 2017 to really expand our reach on social media, to really expand the network of people that we're talking to beyond those who can come to meetings or can't come to meetings, to really try and get information out about what the Stewardship Council does and all the activities. And so in our annual report this year, we're featuring a lot of the photos that we've posted up on social media and some photos from local artists who go and take pictures in the Delta. And I think there's a lot of good stories in here about the work that we're doing and the work that we're doing with other agencies that we collaborate with. So.
Good. I'm glad you appreciate it. It's a lot of effort. It has a sense of a term paper, due at a certain point in time. There's a flurry of activity just before the publishing date is due, which corresponded with today's council meeting. So it's fresh material, but I agree. Really, really well done. It's a great story to tell. That's an important part of it. All right. Anything else on year in review?
No. No other presentations in here.
Any requests for public comment? All right. Then we'll segue into file item number 11, the priorities for 2018. Jessica?
Right. So 2018 priorities. So this is a staff-led effort to identify work that we both plan on doing and new initiatives that we would like to take on. Of course, the council and council staff have core functions that we carry out every year, and this list of priorities includes areas where we'd like to expand core functions, and then also continues the core functions that we need to do to keep us moving. So the priority initiatives, the priorities really have three objectives in mind. And I think we have a slide to go with this. There's a graphic. That'll come up in a second. So there's really, here we go. So there's really sort of three core areas. So the first is strengthening and implementing the Delta Plan. The second is building capacity for One Delta, One Science. And the second is enhancing council leadership and communications. So in terms of strengthening and implementing the Delta Plan, obviously we will continue our focused efforts and work on amending the Delta Plan chapters, as well as improving and strengthening tracking, reporting, and implementation of the Delta Plan consistent with the Delta Reform Act and state regulatory requirements. In that list of priorities, obviously there's the amendments, there's the 5-year review, and then we have in there also a review of our early consultation and covered action process. Thank you. Evaluating and strengthening the council's regulatory role for covered actions, developing a climate vulnerability assessment. So this is something that has been on staff's mind. We're looking and thinking about the 5-year review of the Delta Plan. There's been some really critical documents that have come out this year from the state that are taking that are just providing new information about what climate vulnerability looks like in the Delta. And so this is a priority for us to really explore the development of a climate change vulnerability assessment that looks at infrastructure risk, risk to human population, risk to the economy, and risk overall. So that's one of our priorities. And then improving our ability to track and report on Delta Plan performance and implementation. So I talked about the 2 dashboards that we released this year. We'd like to continue that work, to continue to improve those. Those were, one of them was sort of a beta version, so we have ways to improve that. And then also to develop new dashboards that track the output and the outcome performance measures in a visually appealing way so that citizens and stakeholders can really look at what the data is saying about the Delta and sort of long-term trends, how we're doing in implementing how we and other agencies are doing in implementing the long-term vision in the Delta plan. Are there any questions about that topic before I jump into the next?
I have a question on the databases.
Mm-hmm.
There's an Assembly Bill 1755, and we're, if I understood correctly, pretty active in the implementation of it.
Yes.
How's that going, and where are we going with it?
So that's a good question. So we continue to be very involved in implementation of AB 1755. And Reiner, you might be able to answer this in a little more detail than I am. So I'll give a quick overview and then I'll kick it over to Reiner. So we're involved in a few steering committees, both at DWR, who's leading the effort. They are part of that legislation and have the responsibility for that. So we're participating in that. We're also participating in a group at the Water Board to help implement that data. But what we're looking at as staff this year is we have several databases that help track information on the Delta plan. And so we're looking at how to make that data more open and more transparent. We're trying to upgrade our systems. Some of them have been developed, and some are a few years old, and so we're trying to sort of modernize those systems. But I think where we're headed is to develop this output and outcome dashboard where you can really visualize the performance measures. A piece of that too is to develop a science tracker, which is really helping track some of the activities going on in the science community, whether that's publications or networks of experts that can weigh in on a particular topic. So we're in the early stages of that development, but this is where, this ties in with the work on the Delta Science Plan overall, and then sort of continuing to provide support for the Delta science community. So those are the two main components of those upgrades. And Reiner, do you want to add anything about AB 1755?
Sure, just briefly, because obviously you're aware that we're updating our performance measures now, and that is truly in the works already. But without having access to data, the individual data are feeding into the outcome and the output performance measures. So they're aggregations, they're almost like indices, if you want to call it that. Multiple metrics go into them. And so if we don't have access to those data that feed into the outcome performance measures and our success dashboards, where we can see how much we and others are moving the needle in terms of Delta Plan implementation, without that, we have a hard time getting these outcome and output performance measures reported on. So that's really our key role, and we have multiple staffs tracking all the efforts that are going on among Fish and Wildlife, State Water Board, DWR, and all the silos within those agencies to kind of, including state and the Delta Conservancies, and there are lots of data generating entities. So we keep track of that, we keep our ear to the ground, and we participate in some of these in the work plan development for taking the next step. So we'll be happy to report that out when we get there. And don't forget, this is all based, AB 1755 was the basis for that was our data summit and the white paper we issued in 2016. And it's really one of our accomplishments that we take. We don't hesitate to take credit for that. So it influenced how AB 1755 was crafted, and now we're tracking implementation and participating in it.
Thank you, Reiner. I would be interested if we have, I know there's some recommendations that came out of the data summit, but if the council has any recommendations on governance of databases and open platform, if we have a summary document, I'd be happy to receive that. I'd really like
Great.
to read some of those recommendations.
Yeah, there will be a few products coming out this year, and when the time comes, we'd be happy to share that with you and what the implications of that are, or those products and the value of those are. And if you're interested, we can talk later if you want to hear when the drafts come out, or if you want to be notified of that, so that you can take a look at, and your staff at TNC obviously has some interest in this too.
Okay. All right. So moving on, the other priority area is really building capacity for One Delta, One Science. We've talked about that a lot today. Dr. Callaway talked about initiating and completing the Delta Science Plan 5-year review and update. Last year was the State of the Estuary Conference. This year is the 10th Biennial Bay Delta Science Conference. It's a little bit earlier this year. It's going to be in September. It does not conflict with a council meeting. So in the past, we've always invited council members to come and attend the Bay Delta Science Conference. It is a really great way to understand and sort of get a full picture of the work that's happening in the system. We play a major role in supporting and shaping that conference, and it's definitely a highlight, and we're really looking forward to it this year. So. Another major priority is identifying and pursuing funding for critical science. So the Science Action Agenda identified 13 priority science actions to fill critical gaps in the Delta. And so with the identification of these priorities is opportunity to move forward with implementation. So we'll be continuing to work with the agencies, the science agencies, groups like IEP, the Delta Agency Science Work Group, which is a subgroup of the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee, DPIC. They're really helpful. That group of scientists that come together are really helpful in sort of implementing and thinking about implementation of science priorities. So we're going to continue that work this year. We will also be developing an adaptive management forum. So one of the substantial challenges in achieving co-equal goals is really understanding uncertainty and what comes with uncertainty. And so adaptive management, it's a critical part of the Delta Plan. We do a tremendous amount of work on it. The Delta Independent Science Board does a tremendous amount of work thinking about adaptive management and synthesizing sort of the best available for adaptive management. So this year we'll be putting together an adaptive management forum to provide adaptive management training to build capacity for planning and implementation and share lessons learned across the Delta and elsewhere. We will be finalizing the draft water supply adaptive management framework and beginning to develop an implementation plan. We will lead integrated ecosystem modeling efforts to support decision making. This was a major recommendation coming out of the Science Enterprise Workshop on how to better support science enterprises overall, really emphasizing, and I believe this is a little bit of what we were talking about earlier today, is how you connect data to decision making, and integrated modeling and forecasting is a really critical link in that, in both visualizing the data, identifying where there are sensitivities and gaps in the system, and being able to make decisions based on that information. So we've made, and under John's leadership, we've made a lot of headway on that steering committee, and we're hoping for more work this year. Provide independent peer review, advice, and synthesis services to support state and federal agencies. This is a core function of the Delta Science Program, and we expect that there will be more work this year. A good example from last year is the LOBO review, the long-term biological opinions.
The long-term operations of the biological opinions.
And then continue to provide science support for the EcoRestore Adaptive Management Program. This is important work that we're doing to support the Department of Water Resources and California Natural Resources Agency on the EcoRestore program overall, and we'll continue to do that work. So any questions about those items before I continue?
Yes.
Yeah, I do have I guess it's a process question. Under finalize the draft water supply adaptive management framework and begin to develop implementation plan.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like the Independent Science Board weighs in after. And why aren't they earlier on in the process? to provide input?
That's a very good question, and I'm going to hand it to Reiner because I think he can provide a little bit more detail, especially specifically about this study.
Right. Again, the timing works out really well because right now the Independent Science Board has a work team that is reviewing the water supply reliability theme in the Delta Plan as we speak, and that subcommittee, that work team of the Independent Science Board will be part of the initial review before it actually goes out to the wider world and the whole Independent Science Board. So we'll have a chance to get selected members of the ISB involved in shaping the initial internal draft and then vetting it with a larger community that can then weigh in. And it's really sort of the equivalent of the restoration the Restoration Adaptive Management Plan that is under the Eco-Restore umbrella at this point. So that's the other part as it was described in the Delta Science Plan that we issued, the first version that we issued in 2013.
And I guess I'm focusing in on Independent Science Board. So if let's say there's a huge disagreement between the Independent Science Board and staff, how is that resolved by negotiation, or does the science take precedent, or how does that process work? Or have we had that issue, and how was it resolved?
I don't think we've had that level of disagreement in the past, but I'd say the Independent Science Board serves as a review and gives us the input, but the product is the science program's product. So it's up to us to respond to their input and adjust things, but it's our review. They do their own reviews, and their reviews they have the final say on, but the products that come from us, we do. One of the other challenging things is, as you noticed, it's the Independent Science Board. So we don't ask them to develop the product and then ask them to review it. Otherwise, asking someone to review their own work is not going to be of any value. So they do give us some initial guidance on critical issues, just sort of general input, but then the process that we've worked out really, I think, for the last few reviews is the Science Board, then develops, or in the case of the ecosystem amendment, the Planning Division develops their product, and then after it's either, when it's close to finished, we don't want to say, okay, we're done and we want your input, but we can't incorporate it. We want to be able to incorporate their input, so we try, we try to work out that timing so that it comes early enough that we can respond to it, but they're not creating the product.
Okay. All right. And then the last sort of major goal and objective that is listed on the 2018 priorities is to enhance council leadership and communications. So there's a few things listed under here: strengthening state and federal agency coordination through the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee. So the DPIC meets twice a year. In the past, we've really focused on progress on ecosystem restoration. So it's been a great reporting venue for the Eco-Restore program. We've really focused on science and how to build capacity within the science. We are, within the science community, we are starting to plan for the April meeting, and I won't really reveal the topics right now, but I think, when we get closer, I think we'll be able to talk about sort of how we want to focus the DPIC committee this year. It's really a tremendous opportunity for those agencies to get together twice a year to talk about priorities overall. So that's at the top of our list. Developing a 5-year strategic and operations plan. We were created in 2009 by the Delta Reform Act, and we've accomplished a lot of those mandates. As we continue to evolve, it's really time for us to develop a 5-year strategic and operations plan to help guide future efforts. We anticipate this will include some executive team training and succession planning for staff and leadership. And then also develop a communications, outreach, and public participation plan. So we do a tremendous amount of public outreach now. What we are looking at is what outreach we've been doing, especially over the course of the past few amendments, and how to really take this to the next level and make sure that we're communicating with and working with the community, and that the work that we do is really open and transparent decision making. So that's another focus for next year. Any questions?
Any questions? This is a staff-driven plan. It's being brought to the council to ensure that they haven't missed anything. So as you have reviewed this, the diagram and the explanation behind each of the points, I think Jessica and Terry and Reiner and John would like to hear if there's an issue that you were hoping to address in this next year that is not on the list.
I think that's the one thing that they didn't do is miss anything. I kind of, and I talked to Jessica a little bit about this, and I have to say I have to commend staff on a very ambitious vision. And, it's amazing the amount of complex, big issues that we deal with. And I was struck by, and I also mentioned this to Jessica, the other report that just on the science program on staffing levels, and they're carrying, and you look over a few years, about 10% vacancy rate. And I, how that relates to the rest of the organization, that wasn't in the report. But, we've had, since I've been on the council, we've had some really big issues. And what I, get concerned about is if we get too ambitious. And, one of my comments is, gee, this says 2018, but not everything here gets done in 2018. And I think that if you're looking for feedback, I think we've got to separate some of the things, especially in the science program, that are ongoing efforts from, gee, this is a priority for 2018. So that's one comment. But none of the issues, and I think this is where we really have to recognize staff, none of the issues that they deal with are easy or routine, or you can really get done quickly. And I think Reiner you raise a really good issue, which I'm concerned about, is you've got, we're moving forward on the amendments to the plan, you've got performance measures, but every time we have a meeting, we're talking about data and the need for more data. And I think there's pressure to show that, well, hey, here's how we're making progress on implementing the plan, and we've got these performance measures, yet the other side of the house is telling us, well, we need more data, we can't draw the conclusion that you want to. And that's just, that's science, that's tension that's built in. So we've got some issues, we've got the plan amendments. One thing I can't get out of this is, well, what do we really think is important? If we had to say, I agree with how the overall objectives, but it's okay, we've got the amendments that are coming, we've got covered action, we've got ecosystem, and you want to do a 5-year strategic plan with the council? Are we going to get that done in 2018? That it's sort of like, hey, what can we do to help you, at least in one council member's opinion, to help you narrow the focus so you know what's truly important? And also, do you have the resources? That's my question as a council member. Do you have the resources to accomplish all this?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm happy to answer that. Thank you. I appreciate the recognition of all the staff effort on this. I think it is, we do have a lot to do next year. One important piece of this, and I think you see this in the reflection of the 2017 priorities, is a lot of this work is ongoing. So that in some ways, this is a rolling list. All of these things will not be completed in 2018, to the extent that some of them are core functions. We will always be doing peer reviews. We will always be issuing funding for critical science investigations. Every 5 years we will be reviewing the Delta Plan. We will likely have more amendments sort of in the interim. So to some extent, it's really sort of a highlight of what we're doing as a core function. There are a few new initiatives in here. So one of the new initiatives is a climate vulnerability assessment. This is something that I do not expect will be done in 2018. This is probably likely to take 2 years. But getting it started in 2018, I think will really help frame some of the issues around the 5-year review. Our dashboards on performance measures, both the administrative and the output and the outcomes, it's a core function. We will always be working on this. Part of this is to really help organize and focus where we're starting new things so we don't start too many new things, and then to identify where we're sort of moving forward on other ones. So we'd actually considered whether or not this should be the 2018-2019 priority list. But I think, we do have a lot of these will be ongoing. I think we adaptively manage in terms of resources. You sort of mentioned staff and vacancies, and I think we have a lot of opportunity to bring on new staff that can help with a lot of this work product. Yep, we're gonna be adaptively managing as we go.
Sometimes what makes this difficult, and I've been in your position, are these council priorities or are these staff priorities? Are you asking the council, because I think did we approve, Mr. Chair, the 2017 priorities, or is this just
We endorsed them.
Okay.
We didn't take a formal vote. But they are staff priorities that they would like the council to endorse.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Terry and Reiner wanted to add.
So Ken, I want to thank you for acknowledging that this is a ambitious list. You didn't see the first one. This was pared down. So I think staff took this really, really seriously. And one of the intentions at least I can speak to the planning side of the house, is what can we do to be more efficient? So there are some things in place, or things that haven't been in place, that we feel like if we spent a little bit of effort, maybe a little, I'm not sure how much effort it's going to be, but really to be more efficient in our processes. And I think the improving our covered action and early consultation item is a really good example of that. We could do better, and staff feels really strongly about that and are motivated to do better so that we can help those applicants get through the process. So I just wanted to acknowledge it was a longer list. We pared it down, and everything's important.
Can I think? Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say one thing too. So it is staff priorities. I think one piece of feedback that would be really helpful for me, and I think for staff, is sort of where does the council see yourself in this? What are things that you want to focus on? Where can we bring presentations or information that will help you in decision making? So we were talking about data. AB 1755, sort of understanding how information about the system is being organized. Is that a topic that's interesting over the next year that would really help support the council in your decision making? So I think the feedback on that would be really helpful for us.
Mr. Chair, I'm still kind of and that's a good question. I think we need to be able to respond, but I'm still at, if we're doing our role and we're assisting staff and we're providing oversight, and there's some limit on what we can absorb and do our due diligence and have a process. So that's when we look at some of these items coming up. That's why I look at something like, if we were to do a 5-year strategic plan and really give it the time and attention it deserves with everything else we know on our plate, that's on our plate this year, can we do it? or do we need to kind of look at, well, when do we do it? I think, that's the, we're not the bottleneck, but we're part of the process. And so how do you take these very big, like I said, you guys don't work on anything that's easy or routine. Nothing that I've seen. It's really very difficult and complex, and you got to be thoughtful and work your way through it. So how do we schedule that out, and do we be a little more specific about how well we want to start the conversation? Because if you say we want to do a strategic plan, my first question, and I think maybe some of the other council members have been part of this, is, okay, what's the process? We're going to have a facilitator. This is the council's strategic plan. So that it's not an easy thing, and I think if we try and condense it, then you're not getting the value out of it. So that's where I think you need to take maybe a critical eye and see how do all these things relate to each other. What do we think is important? If you ask me, and we're looking at all these amendments and ecosystem and all this kind of covered action, it's like, well, that's the stuff we need to be ready to absorb. That's going to take a lot of attention of the council and staff support. How do you fit this other stuff in? And if it is multi-year efforts or it's ongoing, let's separate it. I mean, just from my perspective, if you want to get more value out of this, it would be helpful to kind of refine it a little bit in terms of schedule and resources and the council's role and that kind of thing. I'm sure I just volunteered for something.
You might have.
Strategic plan.
Yeah, strategic plan. Well, so the strategic planning is a really interesting topic, and staff knows that I think about this a lot, and I talk about it a lot. It's interesting because we're in the midst of a 5-year review of the Delta Plan and the Delta Science Plan. The strategic planning item is driven, this is really driven at the staff level, and it's also driven by a state requirement to do workforce planning. So we know that we need to do that. Staff has been spending a lot of time this year doing leadership training and leadership development internally. And we see a natural extension of that to be doing some strategic planning over the next year. So I think this is one of those items that would be worth to be extending over 2018, 2019. I don't think we'll be bringing it to the council for any amount of discussion or any amount of process before fall of next year. We do have a lot on our plate right now, so it's not something that I expect to be bringing in, say, April or in June. It's really sort of a latter part of the year process, if that's helpful.
The things that we should explain so that we get a sense of timing and also priority, because this is, sometimes things slip, and well, what can we slip? What can't slip? And we know sort of what is at the top of the list coming our way, and things that you're working on.
I would be happy to bring a schedule back to the next council meeting that starts to look at maybe a little bit more nuance on where these priorities fall, what the sequencing is of them, and what the council can expect in terms of presentations or workload or decisions, if that would be helpful.
The way you explained the strategic plan now makes it sound more like a business plan, as opposed to you're asking the council to adopt a strategic plan.
Right, and we can talk about that more too.
Okay, no, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, this plan doesn't take into account things that may arise, such as appeals and other things. So I think your suggestion of a timeline, some are ongoing, some have a start and stop point, would be very helpful to bring back next month. Okay. Anything else on 2018 priorities and goals? Did Reiner have something to say? Okay. So apparently we haven't missed anything. We may have more on our plate than we can handle, but that's the nature of our business. There's a lot to do. Okay, is there any public comment on file item number 11? File item number 12 provides an opportunity for the public to comment on anything they wish. None? Then we will proceed to file item 13 and declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you all for coming.